There's no coincidence our first elected black mayor of Philadelphia also co-signed the dropping of the bomb on the move. Dropped a bomb on a city block.
Wait. Whoa. Say that again now? Who did what? Say
Our
it again.
first black elected mayor dropped a bomb, like co-signed the usage of dropping a bomb on a city block on the move organization.
Okay, wait, hold on a second. So when that move thing happened, the mayor was black at that time?
Yes.
It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free.
Welcome to another episode of Freedom Friday. It is Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after this hour with Sharif, Ish, and me. Welcome back. Today we are talking about the weaponization of the KKK Act, but we discussed that in our last episode, and now we want to extend it because Minnesota and Minneapolis, yes, we have been in the news, but now there are rumors that the effort of this administration, President Trump's ICE efforts in cities, and specifically blue cities, is about to go to Philly. And since we have two Philly educators as the main hosts on this show, I thought it might be interesting for us all to get a history lesson, a lesson of the history of resistance in Philadelphia, period, and bring it up to contemporary times. Like, because as someone who doesn't live there, I would just love to know what's going to be the character and the attitude of the city once they have the same thing that we have going on in Minneapolis. Now, you see what Minneapolis does. Minneapolis shows up, they throw snowballs, they throw rocks, they bring out trash cans, they use whistles, they blah, 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 blah. They bird dog them, they follow them or whatever, and they get arrested. But Philly is
bird dog. You're not even a hunter, and you're using that term. Proud of you. Go ahead, bro.
Well, I'm veggie racking on somebody else's cliche. Let me just use everybody's cliche. So anyways, the rumors that after Minneapolis, ICE is going to Philadelphia, and social media is buzzing, TikTok is lighting up, the residents, officials, even white folks are saying that this is not going to be the exact same thing. The attitude of the city in hearing that they may be coming there now in bigger numbers, because they're already there, but coming in bigger numbers is good effing luck with that. That's the city's response, basically. That's the gritty response with his crazy eyeballs. Now some people need to really pay attention to that this is a city that riots when the Eagles win, not when they lose, right? This is a city that threw snowballs at Santa Claus. This is a city that used to throw batteries at opposing players on sports teams. Philadelphia has been organized against federal overreach since 1817 and probably even before. And the black tradition of resistance in Philadelphia is even more pronounced than the mainstream tradition of resistance in that historic city. And I want to talk about that today. For everybody listening and watching, I just want to say we are going to be putting these up on the EdPost website. I will also, you can contact me at any time. Each of these talks that we have, there's a lesson plan that goes along with them, a sketch of a lesson plan that has not been approved by my brothers here necessarily. So don't fault them if it's a faulty plan. But reach out to me, connect with me, contact with me, and I will give you the show notes and the resources that we have for this. But fellas, that's the opening right now. I don't know anything about Philadelphia except for what I've read in books and my own research over time of notable figures and notable events in Philly, but I don't have any detailed or textured knowledge. So what's your response to Philly's going to be different for ICE if they surge there the way that they did in Minneapolis? It's going to be different for them.
Well, look, let me just temper it, this whole conversation with one, a lot of the white folks here, they're more passionate about black folks playing sports than they are about justice. So let me just temper it there. So yeah, you may see that those crowds in the streets for Eagles winning or losing, it ain't quite the same when they see injustice. So I do want to say, more passionate about entertainment than justice. All right, so I just want to temper it there. And then not to say all of them, but I'm just saying just the reputation that the city has, that is a big part. It's about entertainment in a lot of different ways, black bodies, scoring, running, jumping, etc. That being said, as far as the history of Philly, I would even go even further back to, when we're talking about some of this, not further back, you mentioned some great stuff in the show notes that we'll jump into, but even in Lamont, which is across the street from Philadelphia, Camp William Penn, where a lot of black soldiers trained for the during the Civil War, and then they were a significant portion of them were part of the Juneteenth. They went from PA to Texas. And they were part of second emancipation and making sure that Texas was liberated from the slaveholders too. So I just want to, capture that, but, looking forward to this conversation because it is a long history of, activism, grassroots, many of the folks that we, just love dearly. In this place. Yeah, so looking forward to this conversation, man.
And I should do it justice, and I didn't do this, but here's the timeline of things that I pulled for the infrastructure of resistance in Philly. 1817, Mother Bethel AME, 3,000 black Philadelphians held a mass protest to oppose colonization. 1830s, the first national black political conventions happened in Philly. 1838, mass meetings against voting rights that being stripped away from black populations. That is a Philly that was based in Philly. The trolley desegregation victory was in Philly long before Rosa Parks and others, and that was in 1867, 2 years after the end of 2 years after supposed emancipation. 1870s, there was organized resistance against election violence in Philly. In 1944, there was a strike of black workers against job discrimination, a mass strike. 1960, Cecil B. Moore, Girard College protests, Columbia Avenue uprisings, that is native to Philly. 1983, Wilson Good elected, organizing and got organizing electoral power in the city and more black power in the city. And now here we are in the 2020s, 2026, and the President of the United States removes slavery exhibits and is planning on surging the city with ICE agents. That's I wanted to offer that into the historical record, that there is timeline by timeline, and I missed some. There are other things you all could put in that timeline that I think would be important for people to know. I'm just trying to make the point it's a city with a tradition. It's a city with a tradition of resistance and organizing. So, Ish, take it from there, brother. What am I missing about Philly will be different?
Well, we also got to point out in 1830, you have the first colored convention here in Philadelphia by Mother Bethel AME Church, which also is the first independent black church in the nation, founded by Richard Allen. And that long tradition is actually the longest piece of land owned by black folks in the country, is the land that Mother Bethel is on. So we just got to really just preface it like that. So Black Philadelphia has had a long history, had actually the largest free black population by 1838, hence the law that they passed to strip people from the right to vote at that time. But at the same time, you also had folks who were involved in the Underground Railroad and also vigilance societies. There's also the Daughters of Africa. The first woman-led abolitionist group was also founded here in Philadelphia. So Philadelphia has a long tradition of kind of I don't want to be the first, because that's old and all that. But Philadelphia has a long tradition of organizing and creating the conditions of, for the black community to actually have a protective force, to have something stable that they can point to, such as mutual aid societies that Richard Allen was involved in and Absalom Jones, that became the model for even what we talk about mutual aid in today's context, when we talk about what it actually means to organize. When blacks and whites pulled their resources together and built Pennsylvania Hall, right? That was burned to the ground by racist whites in the city because they were fearful of that type of collaboration. And don't get it twisted, people who were involved in this work during that time, during the enslavement period, were breaking the law. They were breaking the law and being very clear that's what they were doing. William Still was housed here, you know what I mean? So it just speaks to that long tradition. And I would also point out to folks, if you want to learn more about that time period specifically around 1838, because you have one of the first black censuses here in Philadelphia, the census of 1838, I would suggest folks visit 1838blackmetropolis.com. They have great stories of everybody know about Henry Box Brown, like hiding himself and mailing himself to freedom. There's actually a story of a woman, Lear Green, that did that also, that came here. There's also stories of a pregnant woman that mailed herself towards freedom. And these are the stories that they're digging up and they're uncovering from this information from the archives, man. It's brilliant stuff, and it's just history that's just being rediscovered right now. And that even lays the groundwork to what we see later with Octavius Catto. And there's a direct line for how these civic organizations are connected with one another, and their children's role in being at the forefront of civil rights and human rights after the end of the Civil War.
This, what you just mentioned, the 1838 Black Metropolis, is a beautiful site. It's a beautiful website. So people listening and watching, please mark it down. This is an educational show. Mark that one down. Go look at it and check it out. Fellas, I want to ask you a question. The way that I presented that timeline is something that happens to me often when I'm doing these type of timelines. There becomes this gap of time. I do 1800s all the way up until about 93 or 88. And then from there until now, it's almost always like, yeah, and then here we are, here, now. Help me out with Philly. Help me with Philly, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. If I missed anything, like what could I fill in that gap with in that time period?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of the activists that's not talked about a lot, and I don't know why I'm blanking on her name, but the sister who was, and I disagree vehemently with her when I was, 14, 15, but she was really talking about the rap lyrics and
Dolores Tucker.
There you go.
Yeah, Dolores C. Tucker.
Yep. And, like what she was saying, of course, I'm like, no, that's not really, and you got to understand, you know what I mean? Like really, I was misguided and in critiquing her, pretty harsh critique about like what was happening. But she was prophesizing as far, in a way where like now I sound just like her when I hear some of it. I'm just like, whoa. Where's DC Tucker? You know what I mean? And then I would also talk about, and this still goes back to like, early in the 1800s, but, early 1900s, like the Philadelphia Negro and how W.B. Du Bois talked about the Philadelphia's 7th Ward and, what was happening and what was going on. And there's a and all these stories are like complex, right? And, there's layered. Right, because there's also, Matthew Countryman writes in Up South of like how, so-called middle class, or, respectability politics Negroes were during this time too, like how they were unwelcoming, in the same way that we got Black folks now unwelcoming the immigrants, unwelcoming to, there's a correlation around that people have always said like, oh, I'm going to protect what's mine, even though it's just a crumb, even though I'm not fully accepted. So I'm going to make sure that I'm not fully accepting to others, and so that even though while that was happening, that happens today too.
When you say that, are you talking about within our own community? Like
Yes.
There's a class problem. That's what you're saying. You're pointing out the
100%,
class
yeah.
problem.
So in Up South, you had people, whether it was even during enslavement, people, using the Underground Railroad. Philadelphia obviously was a particularly hub on that. Everybody didn't want runaway enslaved people here, including some Black people. They didn't want them here. They didn't want the attention. They didn't want the drama. They didn't want the federal intervention, right? Like when it was like the Fugitive Slave Act, they like, hey, we don't want the federal and the federalized, the deputized folk. We don't want the drama. We don't want the noise. We got our safe zone. So if y'all come here, y'all bring in drama to the place. Later on, the Great Migration, same thing. Like, hey, we're good. We're getting the crumbs. Now we might have to share the crumbs the white folks are throwing us if more of y'all come up here. Don't come up here during this Great Migration. Philadelphia, I think South Carolina was the largest kind of population percentage wise. It was from South Carolina. That's where my maternal grandparents came when the KKK ran them out from Batesburg and Leesville. They ended up in Philadelphia and New York.
Well, let's
but
stick
there
with
were
this
some
for a
folks who
second.
didn't want that.
Ish, how should we handle those people? Like what's our, because we're always going to have those people that Harriet would have shot. So what do we do with, we need a strategy. So today, what do we do with those folks?
Well, first, I definitely appreciate Sharif talking about those parallel tracks. And of course, there's like a whole ideological spectrum that is still kind of there today because those arguments Sharif just articulated back then are still existing today in Philadelphia by very vocal people from, Black, leaders or self-appointed leaders also. Can I also point that out? That's heavy in Philadelphia. But I would say that right now we got to, expose them. To know the historical record, to point to the intellectual tradition that actually shows that, the idea of freedom and the concept that actually what we even understand as freedom was partially developed here by Black citizens in an unfree society, having that tenuous kind of citizenship at the time for a long period of time. So nowadays, we just got to be able to be unapologetic about that and also be very clear about the program that we're doing when we're teaching our children, right? So Philadelphia is also the first in the nation to require an African American history course for people to graduate. Well, we need to make sure the folks that are in the know about the importance of that course need to make sure that the people who teach that course know what they're doing, right? Because there is a situation where you don't have an Africana Studies degree. You never even had to take an Africana Studies course. And you in there teaching Black history about the Jefferson Jet magazine and Meek Mill, losing out the larger type of story and a larger history that needs to be included in these narratives. And so that is one step. So like Philadelphia has those problematic aspects still to this day, but at the same time, those crawl spaces of freedom have been developed and cultivated over time and have communities that have a long intellectual genealogy that have fed into it that can actually produce a situation where folks are being educated appropriately and we can agitate to get more of that on the front line of things. So it is kind of like almost like a spiritual war somewhat around these issues, but we need to be clear on the side of the people who are on the side of justice, the people who are on the side of humanity, which I would say Black Philadelphia has a strong base and also a long history.
Yeah, when I think about the Black Power movement, even like, what was happening, in Philly, whether it was the Panthers or it was the United Front and Move, excuse me, Move, and so many others who were just, grassroots, community based, community led, and that has just a long history, and the people who, they talk about like how Malcolm was almost born in Philadelphia, right? Like his, like had that close. I'm like, darn it, that close. You know what I mean? But just like, the time that Frederick Douglass spent here, the time that Harriet Tubman spent here, the time that, Malcolm ended up spending here, and starting, I forget what number temple, it may have been 12 or something, here in Philly, so like there is that tradition of, pushing back, of one, naming, being clear and direct and naming, not mealy mouth, not, shucking and jiving, not, a lot of hand wringing and sad singing. It's like clear, distinct voice about about justice and what's unjust.
So you guys, I think, open up a hole in this lesson plan, which is there needs to be, you talked about a dual track here. So the city does have a history of resistance and organization going all the way back to the 1800s, but it also has a parallel track that needs to be studied of racism and of structural racism. I've heard you talk about Rizzo before, and I haven't dug in enough about that, but that could be its own part of this lesson plan of, there's the resistance track that we need to talk about, and there's also the structural racism track that has taken place here that actually became part of the national fabric, right? Because Philly's got a historic point with the so-called founding fathers and, all the, Liberty Bell and all that type of stuff, the Americana that we're going to hear so much about this year because of the 250th anniversary. So why don't y'all hit on the themes of that one? Because this might be something, this is a glaring miss in the curriculum right now that that I was seeing as a lesson plan here, this other part. So add that.
Yeah, I'll just say this, and I want Ish to jump in because but first of all, this 250. I mean, that'll be another whole show about, 250 years of it. What exactly? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
really talk about, like, the founding of and what is founded on, the broken spines that it was founded on. You know what I mean? So to me, it's still just like, but what I would say is, when you bring up Rizzo, we often talk about the Black intellectual genealogy, the liberatory cultural spiritual genealogy. There's another genealogy as well. There's a white supremacist genealogy. There's a tree in sports. We talk about coaching trees. We talk about, like, who was your teacher? Who was your teacher's teacher? Well, who was Rizzo's teacher? And the thing about the Philadelphia, for example, the Philadelphia Police Department, it was always not fascinating. Enraging is probably the better answer. They would talk about Rizzo as if he was dead and gone. The people that Rizzo trained, the cadets that were recruited and came on the force because of Rizzo, they were on the force in the 90s. They may have still been on the force in the 2000s. And then they had children in the police force that they trained. Right? And who trained Rizzo? So in all of that, and then when you think about, like, Rizzo talking about, like, our police force, the militarization of a police force that you heard about, maybe a few years ago, Rizzo was talking about that in the 70s. He was saying, like, oh, we have enough to invade Cuba in the 70s. Right? So the militarization. So again, just want to, like, point out, like, these kind of ideas and themes, they don't just die with the person. So when he dies taking a dump on his toilet, the poison that he poured into the well does not just dissipate and disappear once he leaves. Right? And so I think that's an important part. So whatever George Washington, as he was chasing on the judge, that idea of anti-blackness, or I'm going to, keep this black woman under my foot forever and her children forever, like, that doesn't just disappear. But for some reason, people just think, like, oh, it just, evaporates as we evolve. Like, nah, the human conditions remain,
Well, and I think specific to this lesson and this lesson plan, I'm glad you added that, because it's great to talk about a resistance history, but resistance to what? And what were the strategies? And why was there a need for resistance? And who did it? And who was against it? Who made it happen? What were the core strategies? In Philadelphia, I had this list of things of what resistance has looked like in Philadelphia. Mass meetings, legal challenges, economic pressure, direct confrontation, uprisings, electoral organizing, cultural work, and institutional protection. This is a kit. Like, we need to just not tell stories about, like, these things, but we need to make sure our kids know and youth know that there are strategies that made these things happen. It wasn't just Rosa Parks was tired and then she sat down and she refused to stand up, right? We got to stop giving kids postage stamps and make sure that we are giving them facts and strategies. So I'm glad you all opened up this. You tempered me, because I was saying to you at the beginning of the show, like, we're going to talk about black resistance in Philadelphia, blah, blah. And I started naming people, and you're like, yeah, don't quote that person. Yeah, no, this is... don't quote, don't
maybe not them.
I mean,
yeah.
I'll tell you what I was, I was not surprised by, but, like, your DA, Larry Krasner, comes out, and he sounds like a hard-nosed city person that I've been waiting for. He says, to ICE and National Guard, if you commit crimes in Philadelphia, we will charge you and hold you accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Donald Trump cannot pardon you. And he posted a photo that was a FAFO photo. And I'm thinking, well, damn, I've never heard an elected official or nobody in a city talk like that necessarily. Ours here are just kind of like Minnesota nice. Your DA came out and said the thing, and then your Sheriff Rochelle Bilal, I think. I mean, I don't know if I'm saying that the right Bilal. She said, you don't want this smoke because we will bring it to you. She called ICE made up, fake, professional law enforcement, whatnot. Again, I'm like, okay, well, this way we need our sheriffs talking. So anyways, that's my, from a distance take on it. What's the real city take on the ground? If I lived there, how would I be listening to the same thing?
Just two quick things. One from your previous point about resistance. A part of Philadelphia's resistance was also building independent Black schools and independent Black learning centers. Learning center meaning it doesn't necessarily wasn't a school. It may have been out of school. It may have been programming outside. It may have been freedom schools in the summer. So I think that's an important part. Anywhere that the school, how and where and what children learn is a part of the resistance. And people don't always name it that because it's just like, oh, school and education. Education, if it's done right, is part of the resistance. And if it's done poorly, then it is part of the oppression, right? And so that's one thing. The other side, I hear the rhetoric from some of our elected folks. And when I just think about the past 20 years of how many people have been murdered by cops in the city and how many of them are actually in jail, that's you know what I mean? What James Baldwin say, I hear what you say, but it's really like I can't hear what you say because I only, experience what you do. And so we have a game here with cops like, oh yeah, we're going to prosecute you. And then, oh yeah, and then they get fired. And then what happens? They get restored with back pay and probably a promotion. Right. So there's a whole lot of oh yeah, we're going after this person. They end up, doing just fine later. Right. And so there's a whole lot of just stuff. Right. And so this is a federalized police officer, local police officer, federalized police officer. You know what I mean? So I would just tempering what we say and what actually happens, just the amount of time that folks have been murdered in these streets in Philadelphia by people with badges.
Actually, okay, so this is going to be provocative. Ish, I want you to field this one. And this is based on what you just said, Sharif. There is real resistance and there is the rhetoric of resistance. And maybe we should call out the rhetoric of resistance because, Sharif, that's what you were just kind of doing. You were saying, yeah, this all sounds good. To me, from a distance, it sounds good. But the reality is not the same as the rhetoric in this situation. And the reason I said this is about to be provocative, because I don't know if y'all want to touch this, but I was listening to a radio show yesterday or the day before, and they were talking about how every time there's one of these big uprisings, there's some group that stands up and says, we're the new Black Panthers. And they're wearing leather jackets, and they got the beret tipped to the side. Oftentimes, the person leading it is somebody who has ran for office or done 5 other things before they started the new Black Panthers. But in every skirmish, every type of uprising, there's a group that shows up, and it looks like costumes that they're wearing. It looks like performative costuming, nothing connected to the Black Panthers at all. And in this radio program, there was an individual who I think is the executive director of the Black Panther Museum or something, and he was calling this out. He was basically saying, where's your food program? Where's your service program? Where's your taking care of the needs of the people? That's more important than the leather jacket. So I'm only raising this to say we need to teach youth not to be captured by the cosmetics, but to know the difference between reality and rhetoric when it comes to resistance stuff. Because there's a lot of performative stuff that has that. I'm getting long-winded. I'm sorry. Ish, do you want to address this difference between rhetoric and reality and teaching youth the difference between cosmetics and, so they're not captured by it?
Well, yeah, it's definitely connected what Sharif was saying. Who's your mentor? What tradition? Who are you coming from? What did they do? What is the type of work that they're focused on? I think I personally get concerned with kind of infiltration, right? I think of the recent iteration of the Black Panthers that came from. You look up information and it's like, we've been in the streets for a minute. I never heard about this man before. Who are the folks that put him on? And that's real, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Sharif is a Panther Cub. Have you heard about that, brother, beforehand? So it just becomes a deeper question about who's actually doing it for the reasons and who's doing it for show. And there's a lot of show. There's a lot of people that will, hang the red, black, green flag and be all boisterous and they're nowhere when the actually time comes to see, or they're always throwing shade in the game. And I get concerned that that's a perfect opportunity for infiltration. There's also a large kind of like almost beef between different type of Black centered orientations, Pan-Africanists, Black nationalists, internationalists. I mean, I can keep on going on, and the socialist. And it becomes kind of like a malaise of nothing, and that unity is lost. And there's always people calling for that unity, but it's not there. So Philadelphia is real good at that. I would even say we're a victim of our own success sometimes. There's no coincidence our first elected Black mayor of Philadelphia also co-signed the dropping of the bomb on the move. Dropped a bomb on a city block.
Wait. Well, say that again now. Who did what? Say
Our
it again.
first Black elected mayor.
Yeah.
Dropped a bomb, like co-signed the usage of dropping a bomb on a city block on the Move organization.
Okay, wait, hold on a second. So when that Move thing happened, the mayor was Black at that time.
Yes.
The mayor of Philadelphia, when we were all watching that on TV, the mayor at that moment was Black.
Yep, and also the first Black mayor of Philadelphia. And I'm trying to stay away from first, but my Lord, man, I'm just dipping into that. But yes.
Damn.
And you look at that is a perfect example of kind of that contradiction that exists in Philadelphia. We've, over the last, 2 decades, we've elected all Black mayors except one. But you don't really see the situation changing. There's a lot of rhetoric around, we're going to do this, we're going to switch up this, but the conditions for a lot of folks on the ground remains the same. If anything, it has progressively followed the national trend and gotten worse for a lot of working class Black folks here within the city, that a lot of folks now are also more jaded than ever about actually political processes working for their benefit, or the school system working for their children. This is an unfortunate reality when we have a lot of Black faces in high places, whether we talk about, city government, or we're talking about elected officials that we send to Congress and the state houses, right? Philadelphia has the safest Democratic congressional seat in the country, yet we look at people's voting records and it doesn't reflect the true safe seat of standing up for human rights and dignity. We need to point those things out. We need to hold these folks accountable. And then we need to encourage folks to organize from those tactics that we pointed to from before. And then also the reality of, woohoo, the first Black mayor, but he also dropped a bomb on a city block.
So I want y'all to help me out here, because let's say, okay, Sharif, you're a principal again. We're putting you back in the building. Stop all this pipeline teacher building stuff that you're doing. You're going back to the school. We're gonna make you
but that's where the pipeline is. That's actually where it starts. So even if I'm back in the school, pipeline work continues. But go ahead.
We're putting you back in the school. You principal now. You got a turnaround.
That's actually a promotion. You know that.
We got this trash school that is going on here. We need you to go in and do a turnaround, because people don't believe in turnarounds. And Ish, we need you to be a teacher coach, because we got these teachers. Some of them are young, whatever, but they're going to need coaching, whatever. So I'm one of the teachers, let's say. And I just riff on what you just riffed on. And I teach a lesson that says every one of these people needs to be impeached. We need to start impeaching people. We need to start impeaching one class, the upper class. We need to impeach the rhetoric versus reality people, the bougies, the entire class of people that are accommodationists, who actually keep us locked in the cycles we're in. I'm teaching this in my class, and one of the other teachers hears me and complains to you, the principal and the teacher coach, and you have to come sit with me in my classroom during a break to have this conversation with me. And I'm telling you, our kids need to know, our kids need to understand that the political action right now is we need to impeach everybody that is impeding our progress. And you say what to me now? Because people want me fired and whatever. What are you going to say to me now?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is that, is that the lesson, or is that your opinion?
Yes.
There's two.
No, it's the lesson.
So,
See, I'm gonna be a teacher who's gonna push back on you. No,
yeah, I mean, that's great, but I mean,
no.
So I shouldn't phrase it like, is it a lesson? Because yes, it was a lesson that was taught. But like, what is the lesson that you want students to learn? Because if you're saying, hey kids, this is what needs to happen, and they are just supposed to be this vessel that receives your opinion, then they haven't actually been taught. You've actually just shared your opinion. It didn't require them to have any critical thinking. It just required them to acquiesce and regurgitate what you said for them to get an A, for example, to prove to you that they heard you and they can repeat you. That doesn't require critical thinking. So if the idea is like critical thinking, then maybe a different type of lesson would be, here is what the state says, or here's what the city says, here's what the Constitution promises. Okay, show evidence that this is happening for different groups of people. Where is this happening for?
Okay,
Who is it not happening for?
But my real lesson that I'm teaching though is around how class
Propaganda?
dynamics impede Black progress, and that we need to start putting the pressure and attention on the Hakeem Jeffries of the world, who are basically oppression managers and oppression maintenance people, versus people who are going to actually free our minds, free our bodies, and free our souls. And that's the lesson I'm teaching. And you can't come in here and tell me what I'm going to teach in my classroom, because in my classroom, I'm going to, so I'm a radical teacher, right? And you coming in like the man. You coming in telling me, like, you can't teach that.
No, I would just challenge the thought process. You know what I mean? Like, it's one way to say you can't teach this. It's another way to like challenge someone to do even better. Because I would imagine like this person is well read,
Yeah.
but they don't understand the art and science of teaching, and they're misunderstanding what does it mean to educate and empower critical thinking, as opposed to, this is what I just need to tell these young boys, right? Like, we have a ton of that, right? Like, you can go to any barbershop, you can go to any place where there's an old head, and I got something to tell them, and these young people need to That's not teaching. That's chest beating and brow beating, and it centers the ego of what about your experience, and that has to be everyone's thought process.
Okay, so you're the principal. I'm not gonna listen to you.
And so then I'm getting my coach and be like, hey, Ish.
No, Ish got to come in and talk to me, because Ish is the
That's
coach.
what I'm saying. I'm gonna get my teacher coach.
I'm not gonna listen to him. So Ish, you come in. And first of all, do you agree with me or not that class dynamics impedes Black progress? Because I'm not teaching something that is untrue. I'm teaching something that is liberating, because this gets hidden all the time, and we get the Hakeem Jeffries of the world, and we cheer them on. What you told me just a minute ago, actually, I'm still kind of reeling from, like that the mayor was Black at the time that Move Bomb thing happened, is, for me, astounding information. And, I wrote this piece years ago called "Educated Negroes Are Killing Us." And that's what this lesson plan is. You're coming in to talk to me. That's what the lesson plan was called. Education Negroes Are Killing Us. So now you got to sit down with me. He's shaking his head.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing I would say, then Ish, I hand it to you. As a principal, I would say, the feedback I would give is like, I wonder what the dynamic would be if you change that into a question.
Okay. Say more about that. Like, so how?
Educated Negroes killing us.
And then what's the definition of an educated Negro, right? Because supposedly the teacher in front of you, if they're a Black educator, it falls into that category, right? And even approaching
some of the kids be like, yeah, you sure are, teacher.
Yeah, so what are you doing? Like, they'll pull your card, believe that. But I would also emphasize, Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. I would pull out some excerpts of that. I would have a conversation about class dynamics using the 1838 statistics and census back then, and talk about how those groups actually kind of coalesce with one another in order to kind of, what they said at the time, uplift people. But then, is that a problematic narrative, right? So like you're questioning, you're allowing the students to kind of wrestle with kind of their own understanding of what should happen, what society is. And then I would also bring in the fact of like looking at, say, a voting record of someone, and then bring in positive or potentially positive things they did for the community. Because even the mayor that bombed Move, you could probably point to policies, right? And we were talking about this pre-show about another person of color, right, who ran for political office, what they have done, or what they tried to get done during that time period, and then weigh that. Like, is it positive? Like, when we have black leadership or black faces in high places. What does that actually mean? Is that a benefit for the community? And have students wrestle with those ideas, bring in primary sources, bring in kind of like multiple perspectives of like looking back at like the success or the failure. Because even today, with Rizzo as an example, right, there were a lot of black folks that were supportive of Rizzo, and benefited from his patronage system, right, that he created here in the city. And then you can connect some of those folks to leadership that still exists within the city. So it becomes a very messy tale, but we don't want to tell the students the conclusion of what we think. I mean, you're just yapping at that point. You want the students to kind of wrestle and understand their own positionality and understanding of how this relates to their lived experience, to their auntie's lived experience, to the lived experience of what they see on their block, and how it relates to actually the world, and the central role Philadelphia has actually played. And that's what I would emphasize, because I don't care what side of where you fall on the ideological spectrum. If you get up there, pontificate to the students like that is truth, and don't give them the tools necessary to question what you're teaching them or question what others are saying to them, you're engaging in indoctrination. And unfortunately, a lot of people mistake that for education. That's not education, man. That's just telling the students what you think they need to hear. And in actuality, sometimes that is the educated Negro being extremely problematic.
Yeah, I mean, and what, we have to recognize that things are practiced in schools. Things are practiced in classrooms. So if I'm the authority figure and kids are practicing just hearing what I say and agreeing, then that means when they get older, a person in authority, person in the White House, can tell them anything and they will just also acquiesce, because that's what they were trained to do. That's what they were like, oh, well, they know more than me, so I just got to, bow down and obey. I just have to listen. They know more. But not like, oh, let me think about this. Let me try to, like, what is propaganda? And I love rhetoric. And I would want my children, my students to like understand rhetoric and use it as a tool as necessary, but also be able to break it down, critique it, and see like, okay, propaganda is everywhere. Which one aligns with my values, my beliefs, and my work, right? Because the propaganda by itself can be neutral, right? Like I can propagandize like, hey, you know what? Art is a good thing to not cut out of schools. And I can like use all the propagandic tools to promote that, just like I could use propaganda to promote something else, right? Like, and so being able to sift, it's a sifter. You're practicing sifting, you're practicing synthesizing, you're practicing coming to conclusions, you're practicing revisiting your thought process and saying, you know what, I thought I believed this. Now I have this new information. Now I believe this. Right? Like that's the process you really want them to do. Because sometimes I would like challenge my students. I would say something like off the wall and be like, no. And they were like, no, I disagree. I'm like, prove me wrong. You know what I mean? Like just even, I didn't even agree with it. Sometimes in my lesson where things, people would say that, devil's advocate or things like that, I would do that often and I would challenge them and I would raise my voice. And afterwards they were like, but you sounded so real. I'm like, don't use my tone of voice as the indicator of whether I'm right or not.
Wow. So what you two just said is just about the mechanics of good teaching. Like how do you teach as a good teacher, your method, your strategy for getting them to think for themselves, the resources you'll put in their hands and the tools for them to do it. Like you're giving them the set, you're putting it on the table. It's their job to kind of put the machine together on their own. You're giving them the parts to know how to think, know how to, the method. Is that different, though, that what you would do, say, for instance, in an after-school program when you're not bound by the state's kind of rules of teaching or whatever? Is that just good teaching, period, no matter where you are?
Well, don't forget, that ain't the state's rule for teaching.
Would you teach something different outside of would you teach something different, like in the Saturday school, for instance?
No, it goes back to don't teach them what to think, teach them how to think. In school, out of school, in the morning, in the evening, how to think is the most, this is why God gave us a brain, like in discernment, like how to think is like, one of the most, that is the thing, like that is teaching, regardless of where it is. Ish, sorry.
Oh no, bro. I mean, both of us super passionate about this.
Oh yeah,
Because
I know. I feel like my voice raised. I'm excited.
no, I mean
I
for
feel
real.
like I'm getting fired here. I feel like
No,
both
not
of
at
y'all
all.
can conspire to fire me.
Not at all.
No,
Not at
not
all.
at
You
all.
got potential, bro.
Shoot. Listen, I would just say, like, the example of the 1967 student walkout here in Philadelphia, which was the biggest student walkout at the time, and only kind of overshadowed by the Chicano walkouts in LA a year later. Those were students, those were gang members who were organized mostly outside of the school building by people like John Churchville, who here in Philadelphia did a good job, Dr. Walter Palmer, who was a part of the school system, right? And then you had
Bob
this
M. Genzi. Bob M. Genzi trailer.
Yep, and you had this inside-outside game happening, which organized students, not in a way of telling what the students, but empowering them to kind of like put down what they wanted to see. Not only were they demanding that Black history and true history be taught in school, but they were also demanding the right to wear a dashiki to school, to have their hair natural, to have free lunch, to have more Black educators. Like these demands go on. And Sharif, we really need to find those demands. Some reason that's like the actual demand letters down the rabbit hole somewhere. But when we look at this, that's a perfect example of folks kind of like empowering students and then the students on their own. But there's many examples that I've seen and unfortunately like witnessed where adults are kind of treating the children for their own political kind of ambitions or their own political idea of what needs to be addressed. And there's a thin line about how that works. So like even just the idea, would we teach something different inside the building or outside the building? No. I mean, I could tell you that, as a teacher, I've done after school. I've taught the same thing. I've brought the same ideas and challenged the students. And then even the devil advocates idea that Sharif just said is so important. When the students start parroting what they think that you want to hear, you want to hit them off with something. Well, how would you dispute against that, this idea? What about this argument? You might want to bring in the arguments and cultural ideas and see if they start regurgitate and parroting those ideas and then challenging, well, how does that square with what you said the other day? Or how does that square with what we read the other day? And that is that intellectual engagement. Because quite frankly, if you're just expecting them to regurgitate what you're saying to them in order to go out into the world, you're producing the same world that already exists. And I think that it's so important that we're challenging our students to think of a different world. And the only way they can do that is if they're actually engaging in thinking and analysis and intellectual engagement. And unfortunately, that isn't necessarily promoted as much as it needs to be in school buildings, let alone outside school buildings.
Okay, so this is deep. So we have talked about the resistance lesson here, the lesson in historic resistance and how it applies to today. We talked about the parallel lesson plan that needs to be here, which is also the history of what they were resisting in the first place, like white supremacy and institutional white supremacy that has an impact on people's lives. We talked about the class dynamics, which to me feels like the most, especially with everything you just two said, to me, the part where I would probably struggle the most in teaching, because I would have strong opinions, and they would probably leak out, and what you all are talking about is good teaching, like the methodology of good teaching. So I would have to take all that passion or whatever and put it into the methodology, like just think about how I was teaching. But now I want to talk about, because this is where we can end, how all of that leads to the preparation of our young people for a moment. And the moment that is about to happen right now that's possible is that there will be ICE agents coming to Philly that are going to create a condition of some sort. There will be possibly a constitutional crisis if your local officials challenge the federal government. That could create a very confusing constitutional crisis type situation. And then the escalation, if Trump were to invoke the Insurrection Act and send even more troops into Philly, these are three things that are going to create a moment. And if we are educating young people, we're giving them all this background that we talked about and teaching them how to think about it. Is there anything more that needs to be said though, about our commitment to not just being educators, but also being people who arm our kids with intellectual self defense, intellectual self defense, to understand the moment that they're living in.
I mean, what I would say is, all of it, all of that is true and possible. And if I was teaching in a school outside of, like, whatever, I mean, the same conversation I'm having with my, my own children, particularly the ones who are, the college age version, not necessarily the 10-year-old, although, she catches a whiff of. I'm telling you, like, how this 10-year-old is being raised and how I was raised as a 10-year-old is so radically different. You know what I mean? like, yeah. So, that's one piece. We can talk about, like, just the different parenting styles when you grow up in a Black radical tradition, and what that means for the grandchildren of the Black radicalists. You know what I mean? Like, just the ebb and flow of it. But the conversation about, like, the different strategies to be employed, right? Like, what is grassroots activism? But then what's also a part of, like, just the resistance is, like, how do you support in the grassroots, right? Like, so, I would always give the example of, like, in the Montgomery bus boycott, what's on TV or what's often said, what's often taught, even by us as teachers, is often the headlines. And so we have to go beyond the headline teaching to, like, what's happening, who are the women or the people who are making sure people still got to work while it was coming. And it can't just be a sentence like, oh yeah, and there were people who carpooled, period, and then just moved on. No, if someone's committing to carpooling, then that means they were also threatened to have their insurance taken away. They were threatened with extra ticket, harassed parking tickets, speeding tickets, you know what I mean, like that. So it's just like, it can't just be a sentence and then moving on. And so for me, a big part of all of this is, how do we go beyond the headline teaching to the deeper teaching about sacrificing, organizing, and love? You know what I mean? Like, because I love my people, this is what I'm going to do. I'm feeding them, I'm clothing them, I'm doing all those type of deeper things that it's not going to make the headline, right? There's no headline like, oh yeah, so-and-so was carpooling, and here's all the, the in-depth story and human element of it, right? It's like, oh yeah, the Montgomery boycott, it was over a year, this kind of thing. And here are the heroes of that, heroes and holidays type of thing. Here's the date, here's the hero. Now we're moving on to the next thing. Here's the hero, here's the holiday that was that commemorates it, and then moving on. So that's one big part that I think is important for us to. And then the different strategies. There's legal strategies. Like, how do you challenge something, I think is probably what my head lesson would be. What are the different ways that people challenge authority? What makes them authority? Who puts them there? How do you challenge? And what are the consequences for it? And what are the rewards for it? And so that's kind of like the framing I would do. And even in this time now, like, hey, here's what could happen. Here's what's happening in other places. Here's what was going on in Chicago. Here's what was going on in LA. Here's what's going on in Minnesota and all the other places. And so they can, like, connect the dots and, like, okay, what do you predict? What can happen? But then also just other aspects. I would bring in people who've been part of other movements, right? Because that's the thing. Our city is rich with activists. And so they can hear direct. They don't have to just hear from me and just read. They can hear people's voices. Here's how we did. Here's what I would have improved. Here's what I would have done differently. Here's what I'm thinking, right? Like, and all those type of things. And then have them like, all right, you heard all this. You said all this. Let's map out a plan for our community. What would you do? What would you suggest? So that's at least a framing as I start, like, charting, like, all right, how do we approach this with our youth?
And I think it's so brilliant the way you just laid that out, because behind that is the intention, right? You're intentionally thinking of those things about bringing it to the students in order for them to think about it. And I think when we even bring that into a larger picture of that intention of, like, what are the pattern recognition, right? And we talked about this before, that you can find across these things, right? Because you do need the energy of the youth. You do need the radical, right? But then you also need folks who are in positions of power to
Wisdom of
support
the
that.
old and the zeal of the young, right?
Yes.
That's to quote Amir Suleiman.
And that has been a historical trend that we can point to in successful movements of challenging power, right, within this society. And at the same time, it is not based off of just the old saying, or the older folks saying, this is how you do it. It's more of these are the things that we did. This is what we've learned from
They
it.
actually cautioned us from doing that, right? I think, Angela Davis said that, Malcolm said that, like, you know what I mean? Like, don't just take what we did and think you're going to apply it right now. This ain't your, my dad says that, like, this ain't the time. It's a time to use strategies to learn from them, but not necessarily try to copy paste.
Yeah, and see that within itself is another layer, but that's another layer of pattern recognition that can get us to another level of conversation about what could be done or what should be done in the moment that we find ourselves in. Because quite frankly, right now, if I was in the classroom teaching students and I had a bunch of students in front of me right now, there would be so much to talk about and to look at and to read about and to think about and to write about. I wouldn't have an edge of moment. You know what I mean? My students used to come into class during half a days, like many students right now in Philadelphia are having today, and be like, oh, can we just, relax and whatever? Be like, we can chill once we get free. And then have them read and write every single day and challenging them to be like, you don't want to not be part of these conversations, because if you're not part of these conversations, if you're not a diner, you're on the menu, right? And you need to be very clear that there are many folks that and they know how folks look at them, and then ask them, why do you think that and a lot of them will express that they believe that's true because they have internalized the nonsense that society says about who they think they are. And we need to be very clear and challenging that. And see, that's another layer that teachers can really provide students with the confidence necessary to be like, you are smart enough, you are brighter, right? You don't put a bird in a cage. You only do that if they can fly higher than you. And understand, like, if you feel like you're in a cage, why do you think that, are you that bird? And what are they trying to stop? And I think all these type of ideas challenge students to really step it up a notch. But we also need to challenge our educators to step it up a notch and not simply go through the motions of checking off a box either, because that's what you're replicating in your classroom every single day. And like Sharif was saying, the classroom is, those experiences are just like practice for the real world. And we have our students too much practicing to be cogs in the wheel rather than thinking, how can I reconstruct this wheel?
And real quick, Ish and Chris, I think this is why it's important where school design is so important. Like, I think too often, like, people are just like teaching, bland Stroman white bread stuff. And then something happens. Now they want to the teacher isn't trained for it. They've not practiced for it. It's not part of their calculus and paradigm of how they approach. Now all of a sudden, hey, I want to jump into this big, complex, meaty issue because this will be a fun thing. Like, nah, bro, what's your structure? What's your training? How do you know, like, what's the questions? All that kind of thing. That takes practice. That takes a depth of understanding. And we have too many people who are leading classrooms where their knowledge is limited. They don't know what history to pull from, what, conclusions to draw, what questions to ask, yet they're trying to jump off into it's like, you never swam before. Now you're doing the Olympic dive, from, however many feet that platform is. Like that is what I see more often than not, where for me, where if you're always teaching kids critical thinking, you're always challenging them, you're always using real world issues because hey, this may not be the issue when when you have to solve a problem, but it's going to rhyme with this because it is a human condition, human element that has been going on for millennia, right? So this is like why for us, our 8th graders, their history class was it was called social. You met Gerald Dussis. His class was called social justice, and it only studied and analyzed social justice movements that were led by youth. This is what they studied all 8th grade.
Mm-hmm. That's dope.
Social justice around the world, actually, that were led by youth, not gray-haired folks, not elders, by youth. What were the youth doing in these critical types of moments so that they can understand that before they even get to high school? Right? So that was their everyday experience of learning and challenging and being challenged and presenting and working in teams and collaborating and inviting guest speakers to come in and surveying their community members. They were doing all this as eighth graders so that they could be critical thinkers as they continue to evolve their thinking and actions as they get older, right? So that was the structure of the school design, because part of our work was like, hey, how do we help students be critical thinkers and lead and serve in their community? So that was the framework that we were building our entire school, orientation towards. If your orientation is towards something else, now all of a sudden you want to just jump in, we see that go sideways a lot.
A whole lot.
Well, you all have expanded my knowledge of this. And for people listening and watching, today we were discussing the moment and the idea that the President of the United States has declared war on one state and is now taking that on the road to other places. And the lesson plan here was to think through what's the context of what's going to happen in that next place so that we can understand what's going on in the world, not just us as adults, but also as young people. The way that we have approached this on Freedom Friday always is to say, this is what's going on, how would we teach it? We call it the Monday problem, right? So the teachers listening to this sort of thing and engaging in these kind of conversations might always have the question, this all sounds good, but what am I going to do with this next Monday? I'm going to have 30 to 40 kids sitting in front of me. And this has been a great discussion, but what's it going to do for me? I think this has been one of the better discussions for me, because what you all put on the table is stuff about structure. Like when you just said design the school. Who designed the school? Who inducted the teacher? How were they prepared? Who supports them? What are they teaching? How do we know what they're teaching works? Is it accurate? How are they teaching? What is their methodology? Are they telling kids what to think? Are they telling kids, here's the tools to arm yourself to be able to think for yourself? How do we prepare young people? We have a different commitment to preparing the oppressed than we do the oppressors. So yes, we have mixed classrooms of mixed kids, but as an educator, you can't be educating kids if you're not educating them for the practice of freedom. That's what Dr. Fuller has repeated multiple times. Education should be, and he got that from Freire, I think. Education should be preparing young people for the practice of freedom, right? I don't know if you all agree with that, but that's my takeaway from this discussion today: is intentional design, preparation, structure, methodology, all of these things. That is how we are going to reconstruct and reconstitute education specifically for the oppressed and for people that we want to free. This has been another episode of Freedom Friday. You're still not free, but hopefully you're free after this hour with Ish, Sharif, and me, and we will see you on the next episode. Peace!